His suit was dark gray, his tie slightly loosened, and there was something about the way he carried himself, like he had never once been uncertain in his life. He glanced at her calmly, a faint hint of amusement crossing his lips. "Seems we're not going anywhere," he said, his voice smooth, deep, with the kind of tone that lingers. Elena forced a small laugh. "Perfect timing. I had exactly 5 minutes to be somewhere important." "Then fate has a sense of humor," he replied. She turned to the buttons, pressing them again as if insistence could will the elevator to move. He watched her, not in the way men sometimes look when they want something, but as if he was observing a piece of art, something worth understanding. "You work on the 21st floor," he said after a pause. "Marketing, right?" Her head snapped up. "How do you—" He lifted a brow. "You're holding the company badge in your hand." "Oh," she said, exhaling a small laugh, slightly embarrassed. "Right." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was charged, the kind that hums between two people who don't know each other but somehow feel they should. He extended his hand. Adrian Holt. Her pulse skipped. The name was familiar. The company's founder. The man whose signature was printed on the walls of the building she'd worked in for years. She took his hand hesitantly. Elena Rowe. His touch was firm but not rushed. Confident, deliberate. "Nice to finally meet someone who doesn't freeze under pressure," he said, eyes glinting. Elena smiled, trying to hide how flustered she felt. "I'd say the same, but I think you designed the pressure." He laughed, quiet, warm, and genuine. For a brief second, she forgot they were stuck between floors. When the elevator finally moved again, she exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. As the doors opened, he looked at her once more. "I'll see you around, Miss Rowe." She wanted to say something, anything, but words seemed too fragile for that moment. By the time she stepped out, her pulse was still unsteady. Back at her desk, she couldn't focus. She kept hearing his voice, seeing that quiet confidence in his eyes. Something had shifted. And though she didn't know it yet, that short elevator ride had already rewritten the next chapter of her life. If this story already pulled you in, don't forget to like this video. It helps Velvet Shadows bring more stories about connection, love, and the beauty of subtle attraction. 3 days passed, but Elena couldn't stop thinking about him. The sound of his voice, the quiet way he carried himself, it replayed in her mind like a song she couldn't turn off. She told herself it was just curiosity, nothing more. Just one of those moments that linger without reason. Then, late Thursday afternoon, an email arrived. No greeting, no subject line. Just one simple sentence. "Dinner, Friday, 8 p.m., the Vesper Lounge." She stared at the screen, her heart skipping a beat. There was no name, but she didn't need one. Some things, you just know. She read it again, trying to decide if this was madness. He was her boss, not directly, but still, the kind of man who existed several floors above her in every way that mattered. Accepting could mean crossing a line, but not accepting felt like pretending that moment in the elevator hadn't meant something. By the time Friday came, she'd told herself she wasn't going. She'd go home, make tea, and forget about it. But at 7:50, she found herself standing outside the Vesper Lounge, her reflection trembling in the golden light of the glass doors. The place was softly lit, all velvet and amber tones. The low jazz in the background seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. A waiter approached her with a quiet nod. "Miss Rowe?" Her breath caught. "Yes, right this way, please." He led her to a private corner booth. And there he was, Adrian Holt. Same calm expression, same dark suit. But tonight, there was something gentler about him, a warmth in the way his gaze softened when he saw her. "Elena," he said, standing as she arrived. "I wasn't sure you'd come." She smiled faintly. "Neither was I." He gestured for her to sit. I ordered for both of us. I hope you don't mind. That depends, she said, raising an eyebrow. On what you ordered, something you'll like? He replied smoothly. Trust me. Their conversation began icily, as if they'd known each other for years. He didn't talk about business, or himself, or power. He asked about her work, her family, the things that inspired her. And when she spoke, he listened, really listened, in a way that made her feel like every word mattered. At one point she realized she was laughing, not politely but genuinely. It had been so long since she'd felt that light. As the plates were cleared away, he leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. Tell me, Elena, he said softly. Do you always overthink things that feel right? Her cheeks warmed. Only when they happen too fast. Then let's take it slow, he murmured. No expectations. No lines crossed. Just two people sharing dinner. Something in the way he said it, calm, sincere, unhurried, disarmed her completely. She nodded, her smile small but real. When the waiter brought the check, Adrian signed it quickly, then looked at her again. If I invite you again, he said, and you say yes, I promise it won't be for dinner. Her pulse skipped. There was no threat in his voice, only honesty. A quiet kind of challenge, wrapped in curiosity. She met his eyes and held his gaze. Then I'll think about saying yes. He smiled, the corner of his mouth curving just slightly. That's all I ask. When they stood to leave, he offered his hand. Not as a gesture of power, but as something far more intimate, an invitation to connection. And when their hands met, she realized the spark she'd felt in that elevator hadn't been an illusion. It had only been the beginning. Outside, the city lights shimmered like they were watching something sacred unfold. Elena walked home that night with a warmth she couldn't name, and for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what might come next. If this chapter made you feel the chemistry between them, don't forget to like this video and follow Velvet Shadows for more stories that explore the quiet power of love and connection. A week later, the city felt different to Elena, softer around the edges, as if every streetlight and window had been rearranged to keep her in gentle focus. She moved through her days with a new rhythm, an anticipation that hummed beneath ordinary tasks. The memory of his calm smile at the Vesper lingered like perfume on her skin. He hadn't called. He had not announced himself. That was the odd, magnetic thing about him. He arrived as if the world itself made space for him, quiet and unobtrusive. She found his note waiting on her desk one morning, folded simply, no flourish, just 3 words. See me Friday. She nearly laughed at herself with a flutter in her stomach. She'd told herself not to expect anything, yet she put on a dress that felt like a secret and left her apartment carrying only the careful hope she could manage. The meeting place this time was smaller, more private, a discreet salon at the back of a bookstore. Warm wood and low light, the smell of paper and lemon tea curling in the air. Adrian was already there, seated across from an open window where the late afternoon light pooled like liquid gold. His tie was gone, sleeves rolled, and there was a soft, casual look that made him look almost younger, not less sure, only more human. You found a place with character, Elena said, settling into the chair opposite him. Her voice had a steadiness she barely recognized. His presence continued to smooth the edges of her nerves. He watched her with eyes that had patience in them. I thought you might like somewhere quiet. Somewhere that invites conversation. They spoke for a while about small things. A book she recommended. The one song she'd had on repeat for weeks. An aunt who insisted on sending postcards from the seaside. He listened with a kind of devotion that felt rare and luxurious, leaning slightly forward when she laughed, touching the rim of his cup with a focused, almost tender attention. The conversation gently deepened. He asked about the moment she'd realized she wanted more from life than the neat boxes she'd been taught to accept. She found herself telling him about late nights, drafting campaigns, and mornings with coffee and a stubborn belief that something worth doing required both courage and softness. He told her about traveling once, how a city had taught him that small acts of curiosity change the shape of a person. There was no hurry between them. The pauses were warm. The silences invited thought rather than closed-down speech. At one point, he reached across the table to tuck a stray hair behind her ear, a movement so simple and intimate that the room seemed to hold still. Her breath hitched. The contact was restrained, respectful, and it left a map of sensation that lingered along her arm. He smiled, not in triumph, but in quiet curiosity. "Elena," he said, "what scares you most about being truly seen?" She considered the question and then answered honestly, the words falling into the space like a soft confession. "That I'll change, and people won't love me for it. That I'll be exposed, and the illusion will fall apart. And what if," he asked, "you were loved because you changed? Because you allowed yourself to unfold?" The question opened something in her, a small, bright place that refused to be afraid for a moment. She reached for his hand, not impulsively, but deliberately. Their fingers met across a surface of warm wood. The touch was gentle, grounding, and more meaningful than anything dramatic could have been. It anchored her to the truth she'd been tiptoeing around, that she wanted to stay. If this scene makes your heart flutter, tap like it helps velvet shadows continue creating tender stories of connection and longing. They walked out together into dusk, the city breathing softly around them. Outside the bookstore, Adrian turned to her with a look that was neither demanding nor pleading, only earnest. "There is no equation to this," he said. "No contract, no plan. Just two choices, to step closer or to step away." Elena looked up at him. The streetlights painted his face in gentle highlights. The moment felt like a secret that had finally been named. "Then I choose to step closer," she said. He drew in a breath and with a motion that was quiet and reverent, kissed her hand. It was an act of old-world courtesy and modern promise, intimate enough to mean something, respectful enough to honor the person she was. She felt the warmth of it bloom through her like sunlight through a window. As they parted that evening, there was no drama, no cliffhanger, only an unspoken agreement and a soft certainty. Theirs was becoming a story composed of small, honest choices, each one more daring and more tender than the last. The days that followed carried a strange weight, light but constant. Elena found herself pausing between tasks, her thoughts drifting to fragments of that evening at the bookstore. The warmth of his hand, the stillness that followed his question, the honesty it had demanded of her. Adrian hadn't sent another message, but she didn't need one. Something in her already knew they would meet again, not by accident, but because both had quietly chosen it. When he finally called, his voice was calm, almost gentle. "Come tonight," he said. "There's something I want to show you." He didn't say where, only that a car would be waiting. At 7, it arrived. The driver spoke her name as if he'd known it for years. The city lights passed by in soft motion until the car stopped near the waterfront. The building was old, brick and glass, with ivy climbing along its walls. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and rain. Candles burned in quiet rows, throwing gold across the polished floors. Music, slow jazz, faint and deliberate, played somewhere unseen. She followed the sound until she found him standing by a wide window, the skyline behind him like a painting of light and shadow. Adrian turned as she entered, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hesitate. "You came," he said, voice low but certain. "I think you knew I would," she replied, and something in her tone made him smile. He offered his hand, not his command, but his invitation. "Then there's only one rule tonight, Elena. Trust what you feel." She took his hand. No performance, No roles. Just two people breathing in the same fragile silence, the distance between them narrowing until words no longer made sense. The moment was not about possession. It was about presence. About daring to exist fully in front of another soul. He traced his thumb across her wrist, the same place where he'd once brushed away a stray hair, and she felt time slow. The city beyond the glass faded into a blur of color and rain. There was no rush, no firestorm, only the warmth of connection. Every gesture deliberate, every breath shared. When he leaned in close enough that his voice brushed her ear, he whispered, "You don't need to be perfect to be unforgettable." And she finally believed it. When they pulled apart, it wasn't an ending, it was understanding, the kind that lingers long after the sound has faded. They stood there, both changed and completely still, watching the rain trace silver lines down the glass. She turned toward him and smiled softly. "You were right," she said. "Being seen isn't something to fear." He brushed his knuckles against her jaw, his expression almost reverent. "No," he said, "something to remember." If this story made you feel something, warmth, nostalgia, hope, let us know in the comments. Tell me what part of Elena's journey spoke to you the most. The night faded slowly, leaving only quiet light and the promise of another meeting, one born not from rules, but from choice. Because in the end, that's what love really was. Not a command, not a surrender, but the courage to choose again. This was the choice. If you want more stories of emotional connection and subtle passion, subscribe to Velvet Shadows and let the next chapter find you.